In today's film we will learn the story of a Polish cannibal, Kajetan Poznanski, whose fascination with cannibalism drove him to macabre crimes. Kajetan is an exceedingly intelligent person. He graduated from 2 courses: journalism and classical philology. The man has a facility for learning languages and is fluent in at least 4. University lecturers who have had contact with Kajetan believe that he has great potential. His natural abilities, together with hard work, gave excellent results. Without a doubt, he surpasses the intelligence quotient of the average person. The man has a very flexible mind and is able to express himself on many topics. Kajetan comes from Poznan, but studied in Warsaw. There he also started his professional career. Before completing his bachelor's degree, he behaved like an average student. He used to party a lot and spend time with his friends. However, after completing his bachelor's degree, the boy changed dramatically. He became very slow and began to dress like a lecturer, rather than a student. His interests became more academic. He no longer went to evening parties. He preferred to sit in his room and expand his knowledge. This appealed to his female colleagues. They saw in him a mature and responsible man. It is hardly surprising to them. Kajetan really seemed composed and focused on his goals. He had all the qualities of an academic lecturer. He often led workshops where he passionately tried to pass on knowledge to his students. As a male trainee he worked, among others, in the popular Polish weekly, Polityka, or a Polish news agency. He also published his essays in the yearbook. Thanks to his studies he had acquaintances in the journalistic community. Already during his internship he became extremely interested in cannibalism. Most of the proposed articles he presented were specifically about eating creatures of his species. However, these texts were written in an exceptionally thoughtful and intelligent way, so everyone thought that Kajetan was theorizing about such brutal practices, and his views were purely scientific. However, the topics he presented were too controversial, which is why none of the newspapers published these articles. In terms of linguistic richness and style, Kajetan produced excellent texts. However, he was not lucky, and after completing his internship he failed to get a job in the journalism industry. Instead, he got a job at a library. It is not hard to guess that his skills allowed him to get a much better paid job. However, he had to hide his ambitions, and despite the fact that the work of a librarian was not his dream, for that moment he had to be content with such a place of work. He lived modestly, as his earnings were not high. He was definitely not used to such a modest life. As a child he lacked nothing, as he came from a wealthy family. His mother is a lawyer, and his father runs a large company. However, there were likely arguments between Kajetan and his parents, until they stopped contacting each other. So the man had to cope on his own. Of course, from his current salary he could not afford to buy an apartment or a house, so he lived in Warsaw, in the Zalobaz district, with 2 flatmates. Earlier as a student he shared an apartment with a person who remembered him well. This person claims that at first glance Kajetan seemed to be an extremely cultured and well-read. It was impossible to get bored with him. He passionately talked about his interests. On closer acquaintance, however, one could see various eccentricities in the man. Quite unusual for today's times. He had many different interests including herbalism and mysticism. Kajetan loved nature very much and hated city life. In his room he collected samurai katanas and animal bones. He often received guests by candlelight, while music with the voices of natives from the Amazon jungle played in the background. Kajetan is also a very pedantic person. Apparently, even a delicate mess could drive him crazy. Everything had to be in its place. On the subject of order, there were no compromises for him. Because of the mess he was even able to beat up his flatmate. Fortunately, the fight never happened, because knowing today's facts, it could have ended badly for the tenant. How did this terrible story begin? Let's start from the beginning. It was a winter day. On February 3, 2016, The firefighting unit received a report that puffs of smoke were coming out of one of the apartments on Pataka Street. Firefighters immediately rushed to the site. The fire was not large and managed to quickly extinguish it. However, the truth about the fire turned out to be terrifying. After extinguishing the apartment, firefighters discovered a large bag, and in it there was an overburnt human body. The body had no head. In the second room they found a backpack with the rest of the body, more specifically, the victim's head. The police were notified, who determined that the fire was an inept attempt to hide traces of the murder. Officers determined who lives in the apartment. It turned out that 3 men lived there. 2 of them appeared for questioning. It quickly became clear that they had nothing to do with the arson, as they had an alibi. However, the 2 men turned their attention to a third housemate, who was known to them for his eccentric behavior. He was Kajetan. The investigators failed to make any contact with him. They suspected that the man had fled abroad. His phone did not answer, and the man vanished into thin air. The murdered woman turned out to be 30-year-old Katarzyna J. She was a former Italian teacher. She earned a living teaching in language schools and tutoring. The woman graduated from Applied Linguistics and the Academy of Fine Arts. She came from Radom. She was ambitious and linguistically gifted. She loved physical activity, including trips to the mountains or the lake. Sports were very important in her life. She enjoyed learning languages, and especially loved the Italian language. Among other things, she worked as a researcher of the history of Radom and contributed to a magazine called Radom Humanistic Studies. She eventually chose to work as a teacher. The police established the victim's identity fairly quickly, as the person sharing the apartment with her quickly reported her missing. When her flatmate arrived at the apartment, the door to the house was open and the computer was on. Besides, there were brown marks on the floor. In the washing machine, officers found bloody towels with which the perpetrator had wiped the floor clean of blood. An autopsy showed that the woman had been killed with a knife, then chopped up with a saw and packed in a bag and backpack. Circumstantial evidence indicated that the perpetrator of the crime was Kajetan. European arrest warrant and an Interpol red note were issued for the 27-year-old man. This was intended to alert other countries to how dangerous the perpetrator might be. It was established that Kajetan took a 15,000 zloty loan from a bank shortly after the murder. This confirmed to investigators that the perpetrator was planning to flee the country. There was little chance that he was still in Warsaw. Police were aware that the man would try to disguise himself so that no one would recognize him. They managed to get to the surveillance video of one of the Warsaw stores. It was there that the man bought a khaki-colored jacket with fur at the hood. How was he remembered by the saleswoman? During the transaction at the cash register, Kajetan argued with her over 1 gross, which is basically like 1 cent in US, which is why he sank into her memory. A taxi driver who recognized him on TV also reported him. He testified that Kajetan was carrying a bag in his taxi, which was leaking blood. Naturally, the driver was very disturbed by this sight. He sensed that it could be a human body. However, Kajetan reassured the driver, saying that he was only transporting a dead boar. At this stage of the investigation it was clear that it was the body of a woman. Thanks to video surveillance, the route of the perpetrator was established. Police officers knew that the suspect had set off from Warsaw to Poznan. From Poznan he immediately left for Berlin, then to Italian Sicily, and from there to Malta. The psychological profile of the man was very helpful in tracking down Kajetan. It was known that he was frugal, so he would not sleep in expensive hotels or travel by taxi. He was also not helped by his distinctive jacket, which was very conspicuous. Investigators deliberately did not release his clothing to the media, as they realized that Kajetan could follow the news and buy another one. Police had been treading on the pursuer's heels for days. Officers were getting closer and closer to the suspect. They learned that in Malta the man had visited a travel agency because he wanted to get to Tunisia. He also wanted to report the theft of his passport, hoping to cross the border. His plan was to flee to Muslim countries, where he would be virtually elusive. However, he failed to get permission to cross the border, and that's when he realized he had a serious problem. On February 17, 2016, Kajetan was stopped when he got off the bus. He seemed very surprised. He did not resist and allowed himself to be handcuffed. After a few days, his extradition to Poland was carried out. He was transported by plane. The trip was peaceful, but at the end of the flight, when the policeman removed his handcuffs, he threw himself at one of them and started biting him like a wild animal. For this reason, a special helmet was put on him so that he would not hurt himself or other people. He was placed in custody, where he was to await trial. From the very beginning he confessed to the murder. He calmly told how it happened. On that day he left work early in the morning, and then took the tram to Katarzyna's apartment. He had been planning the murder for a long time. He thought about how to commit the perfect crime. After some time he decided that it would be a good idea to kill the tutor. In case of an attack on the tutor, he had the opportunity to be alone with the victim. One evening, while browsing ads on the internet, he picked out a 30-year-old woman. He did so only because the woman in the ad did not include her photo. The man preferred not to know who he would kill. Upon reaching Katarzyna's house, Kajetan took advantage of the fact that she was very polite. When she offered him tea and turned her back to him, he immediately stabbed her twice with a knife. He dismembered her body with a saw, then put her in a bag, and placed her head in a backpack so that he could transport the corpse. To confuse the trail, the killer used 2 taxis. During the ride in the first, everything went smoothly, but in the second taxi, blood started leaking from the bag. However, he managed to convince the driver that he was transporting a dead animal. He then transported the corpse to his rented apartment, which he set on fire to cover his tracks. Kajetan admitted that he had intended to eat his victim, but didn't have enough time to do so. He claimed that he had planned to become a serial killer. The murder was part of his self-improvement plan. For some time he had been doing intense physical exercises, as well as starving himself. The murder was to complete his transformation and make him strong. Kajetan is a very smart person, which is why criminologists do not understand his behavior after the crime. He could have hidden the body much better. So why did he set fire to his own apartment? It was obvious that he would draw attention to himself by doing so. This behavior seems to be very illogical, for such an intelligent man. Why did he do this? Perhaps the commission of the crime overwhelmed him? Perhaps the murder was not as simple as he assumed? On July 17, 2017, Kajetan was charged with murder with particular cruelty. While in custody, he attacked the expert psychologist who examined his case. The first opinion of the expert psychiatrists stated that the defendant was insane, while in the second opinion the experts testified that Kajetan had some disorders, but he was lucid and knew perfectly well what he was doing. After several months, the indictment file was returned to the investigators, as the court decided that the key evidence needed to convict the man was missing. In May 2018, Kajetan's trial began. Due to the defendant's poor health, it was held behind closed doors. Even the closing speeches were delivered, but the court did not issue a verdict. The trial was resumed, as it turned out that new important evidence had come in. A lot of time passed, and the verdict of the court was still not forthcoming. Meanwhile, Kajetan was in the Lodz penitentiary, in the forensic psychiatry ward. He was constantly monitored by the prison service. The guards testified that, according to them, he was simulating mental illness. They believe that when Kajetan knows he is being watched he behaves like a madman. In everyday life, however, he is calm, and in his cell he reads books and exercises. He leads a similar lifestyle to that of a free man. He is also reportedly aggressive and vulgar. There are disciplinary punishments against him. He has the status of a dangerous prisoner, as he is unpredictable. Kajetan eats his meals with plastic cutlery, and the furniture in his cell is fixed to the floor. On January 26, 2021, the verdict in the case of the murder of Katarzyna J. was finally announced. The defendant himself did not appear in court. Kajetan was sentenced to life imprisonment, and will serve his sentence in the therapeutic system, that is, he will be sent to the prison, where there is a psychiatric ward. He will attend therapy there, and in addition he will pay 150,000 zlotys in compensation to the parents of the victim. 75,000 to each of them. The verdict was not final, so an appeal could be expected. The man will still be held responsible for the attack on the psychologist. In 2023, the Court of Appeals in Warsaw upheld the verdict of the Court of First Instance and sentenced Kajetan Poznanski to life imprisonment. The Court of Appeals in Warsaw, in an appeal verdict announced, changed the qualification of his act, as requested by both sides in their appeals, ruling that at the time of the murder Kajetan had a preserved ability to recognize the meaning of the act and a significantly limited ability to direct his conduct. Have you heard of the Polish cannibal before? Thank you for listening to this story. Please like and subscribe if you like my channel.